Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on accelerating innovation with Compliant Database DevOps. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. All attendees will be on mute during the webinar, but we want to hear your questions. So if you have any during the presentation, please enter it into the question box in the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll make sure we leave enough time at the end of the webinar to go through them. This webinar is also being recorded, so we'll follow up with a copy of the recording as well as the slides over the next couple of days. All right, so my name is RNA Secondary, and I'm the head of pre-sales engineering for the North America region here at Redgate. I've been with Redgate for just over 7 years, and as part of my role, I've worked closely with hundreds of organizations in their journey of implementing DevOps for databases and streamlining their processes across the application and databases. Here's my contact info, so please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or feedback following our webinar. For those of you who are new to Redgate, we've been around for just over 18 years, and our key focus is helping companies improve the quality and efficiency of their database change management and delivery, primarily on the SQL Server and Oracle platforms. We have over 200,000 customers from 91% of Fortune 100, as well as startups, global organizations, and everything in between. Redgate is also big on the community. So we share a lot of best practices, learning, and helping to solve problems with the database community through our primary hubs, SQL Server Central and SimpleTalk, which most of you are familiar with. At Redgate, we have a huge focus on continuous delivery and improvement to our products. And as a result, we've released over 1,000 major and minor product releases last year alone, which is a number that seems to be increasing year on year. We also work with a large number of companies within the tech sector who are under increasing pressure to offer their customers new products, features, and releases quicker than ever before. Just to name a couple here, for example, so Skyscanner are now releasing 95 times a day as a result of incorporating the databases into their DevOps processes, or Mamas and Papas trying to move away from the store model and expecting big growth in their e-commerce space. In a recent article by Forbes about innovation, I read that enterprises should be able to deliver custom applications at the speed of ideas. That's the way to stay ahead of competition in today's world, and it's a pretty tall order. So lowering operational costs and enhancing customer experience is the core of digital transformation, and the C-suite and IT teams in any enterprise should work hand in hand to meet the business requirements, drive innovation, and march towards continuous improvement. For companies in the tech sector, where competition is high and consumers are becoming less loyal, the need to innovate is greater than ever before. With innovation being a top 5 priority for almost every company included in the Deloitte Innovation Survey, it's no surprise that IT teams are adopting DevOps practices to help achieve the speed of innovation required for businesses to not only survive, but thrive. Redgate has had the pleasure of being involved in this year's DORA 2018 Accelerate State of DevOps report. And from that report, the research data shows that the highest performing organization which adopt DevOps release changes 46 times more frequently. They have a change failure rate that is 7 times lower, and more importantly, they're able to recover from breaking changes close to 2,600 times faster. The Forbes article I referenced in the previous slide mentioned some key business priorities which really align with the overall goals and outcome of DevOps. So it's no surprise that DevOps adoption across the tech sector is increasing. Companies need to accelerate business activities, lower cost, improve time to market, and bring about a positive change in processes and people. We know that a lot of principles of DevOps are built on top of breaking down silos, reducing tension between dev and ops team, and etc. Interestingly, this year's DORA report called out database development as a key technical practice, which can drive high performance in DevOps. The report directly states that database changes are often a major source of risk and delay when performing deployments. I say interestingly, as it's the first time database has been specifically called out as a key technical practice. For the past few years, Redgate has been conducting our own State of Database DevOps report. And in that survey, we asked people, what the key driver was for extending DevOps practices to the database. The top responses were to increase the speed of delivery and free up developers' time for more value-added work. And this aligns really nicely with the need to innovate at speed. There are many people who argue that adopting DevOps, working faster, having more people involved in the cycle can increase the risk of errors or even data breaches. Now, I hope that if you're one of those people, we will have proven why this is absolutely not the case by the end of today's webinar. But I do want to spend a bit of time diving into the topic of data privacy and protection before we discuss the DevOps approaches you can take to support it. So, today, a company's data is one of its most valuable and important resources. Managing and protecting that data are big responsibilities, and now more than ever, a data governance process must be put in place to avoid misuse and meet regulations. I came across this quote on the slide here from Dr. Larry Poneman, who is the chairman and founder of the Poneman Institute, a research think tank dedicated to advancing privacy, data protection, and information security practices. Dr. Poneman is considered a pioneer in privacy auditing and a responsible information management framework. Security Magazine named him one of the most influential people for security. And this quote really brings home the detrimental impact of a data breach or leak, and also for how long the damaging effects can last for an organization. Despite understanding the devastation a data breach can cause, for you and your customers, data breaches are on the rise, particularly in the tech sector, which in 2017 had one of the highest number of data breaches, second only to healthcare. And this isn't obviously going away. The headlines you see on your screen now are just a small snippet, most of which are from July 2018 alone. So a couple of recent examples, a massive data breach has seen the customer data of more than 46 million mobile subscribers in Malaysia leaked onto the dark web. The leaked information includes mobile numbers, unique phone serial numbers, as well as home addresses. Personal information from multiple Malaysian public sector and commercial websites was also stolen, and the hacker was trying to sell a huge amount of private customer information from at least 12 Malaysian mobile operators. Another example of all the things an MSP could lose sleep over, facing a crisis like the one Platte River Networks did is probably among the most nightmarish to consider. They were the managed service provider involved in the controversy surrounding Hillary Clinton's private email server. Obviously, the negative public exposure led Platte River Network's online reputation to tank. The business suddenly had to deal with unanticipated costs, which had to cover the cost of an investigation, beefing up cybersecurity, increasing physical security at their offices, and etc. So these are just two examples of recent data breaches in the sector, but a harsh reminder of how quickly a data breach can change the course of an organization, taking away from the goals such as customer retention, revenue growth, and innovation. And obviously, the more time you spend fixing errors, responding to breaches, the less time you spend innovating and delivering value to your customers. When looking at a global view of current data privacy and protection laws globally, this illustration from global law firm DLA Piper's Data Protection Laws of the World Handbook gives a very good insight into the existing extent of data compliance laws. The handbook sets out an overview of the key privacy and data protection laws and regulations across nearly 100 different jurisdictions. It states that they continue to witness a period of unprecedented activity in the development of data protection regulation around the world, which will have a profound impact on the way in which global businesses are required to approach the collection and management of personal information. And these changes are being driven largely by cultural and trade considerations and by a struggle to keep pace with emerging technology and online business methods. So we know that the tech sector needs to deliver and innovate faster, and that many are adopting DevOps practices to achieve this. We also know that the tech sector is also experiencing more data breaches than ever before, and that data regulation is not going away. In fact, it's getting tougher. While the traditional approach to DevOps does help drive the speed of innovation, there is one key thing missing here, and it's a database. Now, most of you are likely familiar with DevOps. It's very much in the mainstream with technology companies being one of the biggest adopters over the years. In this diagram, we're showing a standard DevOps pipeline for application code, where the changes are made and checked into source control on the left side before they go through an automated build, test, and validation process in a CI environment. And if and only if those builds succeed, then those changes get deployed out to higher environments for more automated testing before hitting the production environments. But it's very common for organizations to only do this for their application code and not the database. So why is that? Well, ultimately, it comes down to the database carrying business critical data and state that needs to be preserved. So let us imagine a scenario for a moment. So we want to make a change to our application code. A lot of dev shops out there are already following best practices around application lifecycle management and rapid delivery of their application code, such as source controlling, unit testing, automated testing, regression testing as part of their automated process. So that change can be deployed very quickly. We change the line of code, check it into source control, gets built, tested, and moved up the chain, assuming that all the tests are passed and all the validation steps are green. Now, for the database, however, a similar level of change will often involve a lot of manual steps. A developer manually says of database scripts for their changes, maybe put them in source control, maybe not, and then later submit to a DBA team for review and deployments through a ticketing system or other means for deployments to higher environments that may or may not closely resemble the production environment. Ultimately, the deployments of databases are not as easy as swapping old code with new. And this is our fundamental problem when it comes to databases. We can't just simply swap out a table, right? So especially if that database holds business critical data that needs to be safely preserved. So, and because of this unique challenges with database delivery, this means that often we find the databases left out of all these best practices and DevOps processes. So what does extending DevOps practices to the database entail? This is Redgate's preferred database DevOps process, which encompasses both of the priorities we discussed earlier, right? The need for increased innovation and regular releases and updates, while also enforcing data privacy and protection. So the line above is basically what we saw in the previous slide as far as a common change management process for code, regardless of what platform we're talking about. But the bottom line is what's unique to databases. So how do we, in this fast-paced environment, refresh and provision copies of our databases to lower environments for development and testing purposes? So we're going to talk about some of the best practices around that as well as part of our webinar today. Now, before we explore this process in more detail and discuss what good looks like and the steps you can take to achieve best practices in these areas, I wanted to share how other organizations with the need to innovate at the speed have adopted a DevOps approach for their databases to help them increase their releases. So we briefly talked about Skyscanner earlier today. They are a leading global travel search site headquartered in the UK. Their journey from 3 founders with a spreadsheet to a team of 800 people managing the world's largest travel search engine is really fascinating. They now average around 50 million unique customer visitors across their mobile and web applications. And so maintaining and updating their data and infrastructure behind that is a huge task, as well as keeping up with new competition, consumer demand, changing travel requirements, and etc. So by adopting practices like continuous integration, Skyscanner is now releasing database changes 95 times a day rather than once every 6 weeks, which is what they were used to. This isn't a unique case, of course. Companies all over the world are under pressure to release at this sort of speed. But the demand this plays on the database administrators are greater than they have been before. So what I'm going to share with you today is some of the techniques you can adopt to make sure you strike the balance between minimizing the risk of failed deployments, protecting business critical data, and keeping up with releases from the rest of the business, which are pushing to production daily or like Skyscanner multiple times a day. So what can you do to ensure that your database development process is secure and compliant? At Redgate, we would recommend you start by looking at these 4 areas that you see on the slide to start your journey to compliant database DevOps processes. So let's start with the first step. So with IT teams and being under pressure to deliver software more quickly, it's a challenge to ensure the consistency and quality of code during database development, even more so for large teams of application and database developers with different ways of working, or maybe geographically distributed teams in different locations and time zones. So the first step of becoming compliant with database processes or DevOps processes is standardizing your team-based development by adopting best practices like standardized coding, code analysis, database version control. Your developers can save a lot of time, avoid tedious work, and are free to deliver on value-added work. Also, version control is really the foundation to a successful DevOps pipeline, and therefore it's becoming standard in application development and involves developers checking their changes into a common repository during their development processes, preferably multiple times a day. As a direct result, everyone has access to the latest version of the application, and it is always clear, what was changed, when it was changed, and who changed it. This is just as true for the database code, which can also be version controlled, preferably by integrating and plugging into the same version control system used for your application code, whether it's Git, TFS, Subversion, Perforce, or any other source control system. So really, without a proper source control strategy, you shouldn't even consider looking at implementing a CI/CD pipeline for your databases, or even for your application code. Now, in Redgate's State of Database DevOps report, we asked people what practices were in place for the application versus the database. You notice in the graph on the screen that 81% of people had version control in place for the application, but only 53% had the same in place for their database. Now, I'd like to run a quick poll here to see what that looks like for you folks out there. Okay, so let's give everyone a couple more seconds. All right, now let's go ahead and close our poll. So it looks like it's close to 50-50, which is actually not bad. I normally see a bigger number for just application only and a smaller number for database. So that's great that almost 50% of you are already source controlling your databases. But for the other 50%, it's now is really a good time to start looking at source controlling databases. Now, unsurprisingly, there is significantly more third-party tooling in place for the application than for the database. In fact, 61% of people have a third-party tool in place for the application, and only 39% for the database. If these figures look familiar and represent what's going on in your organization, you'll likely want to address it if you're going to increase the speed of delivery and also ensure you are remaining compliant. So what does an advanced development practice look like? So with an advanced development practice, you can deliver consistent code faster, detect code issues sooner, and eliminate lengthy code reviews at the point of deployment. Also simplify change management by running static code analysis and using source control so problems are found early and higher quality code is shipped and deployed consistently to your higher environments. And finally, demonstrate compliance with a robust audit trail and details of everyone with access to your database and see who made what kind of a change and when. So by doing this, you can start preparing for database automation. We'll talk about that in more details in a moment, but it's important to start laying the foundation for automated database deployments with standardized team-based development by taking the first steps towards automated build, test, and release of databases alongside your application code. Without the right processes or tooling in place, database change management slows things down, adding risk, uncertainty, blocking development and operations from working together to deliver value. For example, it's a very common practice for database shops to cherry pick changes and scripts from development environment and promote them up the chain, which results into a deployment process being inconsistent, unreliable, time-consuming, and risky. Ideally, every time a change is committed to version control, for example, a continuous integration process can be triggered, which tests the changes and flags up any errors in your code. That can include identifying broken dependencies, invalid objects, running static code analysis and unit tests to detect bad coding practices, etc. By doing this continuously as part of your development process, the errors can be fixed immediately and tested again before the changes then passed along to a release management tool where the changes can be reviewed before they're deployed to the production environment. By adopting the right source controlling strategy, database continuous integration, continuous delivery, and shift left testing, your development and operations team can synchronize database and application delivery as a result. Your organization can also resolve issues earlier and faster, deploy as quickly and frequently as the business needs, and optimize agility and performance across the full software lifecycle. Now, let's look back at the graphs I showed you earlier. Again, you notice that automation is significantly higher for the application than for the database. So for example, continuous integration, as you can see, 40% for the application code, but only half of that for the database. Or even continuous testing, another area where the gap is pretty significant, 39% for the application, but only 15% for the database. Unit testing is a no-brainer when it comes to testing application code. But for databases, it's close to non-existent. Actually, a lot of the database professionals I've talked to aren't even aware that there is tooling for implementing unit testing for databases. So the sooner we narrow this gap on the automation, we can then prevent delays due to integration issues and keep your development teams in sync through database continuous integration and get early feedback on whether changes you commit to version control can be successfully built and tested to ensure that there is a stable latest build consistently available to deploy at any time. You can also reduce the risk of introducing bugs and defects further downstream by provisioning realistic data and server environments for development and testing, and automating testing as part of your CI process to discover mistakes quickly, enable faster and less costly fixes, and provide opportunities for continuous process improvement. This can help us ensure that we have clean testing and pre-production environments all the time that resemble production as closely as possible. And that can help us make deployment processes transparent, safe, and protect sensitive data during development. With reliable, scalable, and repeatable processes for build, test, and releases, we can gain an automated framework to embed security best practices, reap the benefits of DevOps approach to software delivery, and can achieve data protection by design and default. Next, we look at monitoring. So once upon a time, a data breach was considered to be an event when a third party had gained unauthorized access to health data. However, with the introduction of rules around the right to be forgotten, we now have to add this the fact that even an event when we lose access to our own data should also be considered as a breach, and the predefined responses should be followed. Both these situations rely on our ability to have real-time information on the state and activities of our database environments, and more specifically, database monitoring. As your state grows in size and complexity, the process of manually monitoring them becomes increasingly difficult. Manual checks are obviously time-consuming and reactive. DBAs and ops people find themselves constantly in firefighting mode, and it's really easy to miss crucial elements that put your organization at risk of security breaches or just poor performance. And that obviously leaves you without the historical context for proactive data management. With proactive state monitoring and accurate reporting, your teams can detect, diagnose, and resolve performance problems before they impact your operations or customers. By being on the top of the health and the status of your state, you ensure minimal downtime and efficient disaster recovery as a result. With increasing data protection legislations like the GDPR and HIPAA, it's no surprise that the security and protection is at the top of the list, but almost 50% of our respondents in the recent State of SQL Monitoring survey are already deploying changes multiple times a week, and almost no one expected the frequency of these deployments to decrease. So whatever challenges you and your SQL Server face over the next year, definitely consider including monitoring as part of your solution. It can only make your life easier. Also, 50% of people say security is a key daily responsibility. GDPR ranks highest on the list of security and protection challenges, but interestingly, the majority of people are still firefighting rather than proactive monitoring. With the right monitoring tool in place, for example, you can catch deployment errors, diagnose issues faster, and prevent them from recurring, track and plan a growing state, and even catch unexpected or unauthorized access to your databases and your servers. Now, with advanced monitoring in place, obviously you can diagnose and resolve issues and identify trends and prevent frequently occurring problems. With pre-configured and customizable alerts, you get a view of priority issues alongside baseline analysis and integrated reporting capabilities. You can minimize common causes of downtime like full disks with the complete picture of your server state and a proactive capacity planning. You can stay on top of your performance, maximize availability by pinpointing vulnerable areas, predicting when problems will occur, and taking preventive action. Once you've automated deployments, you need to ensure everything operates as expected, right? So identifying if deployments are causing performance problems and feedback to development can help you create a DevOps feedback loop that helps you continuously improve. And again, improve compliance as with effective monitoring in place. You're alerted to security problems that put your data at risk, such as unauthorized access attempts. So finally, maximizing server availability also meets database availability requirements under legislations such as GDPR. And finally, the final step to achieving compliant database DevOps is protecting sensitive data as it moves through database environments. As data protection legislation becomes more stringent and the risk of data breaches rises, so does scrutiny of how sensitive data is stored and used within organizations. At the same time, development teams are facing growing pressure to release software faster and avoid the database being a bottleneck. So organizations really must find a way to safeguard against data breaches and unauthorized access while also giving your teams access to reliable data for development and testing without risking exposure of sensitive or personally identifiable information. In other recent research we conducted at Redgate, we wanted to identify how organizations currently provision databases and to assess the importance of provisioning requirements to ensure adherence to these emerging data protection obligations. We gathered responses from nearly 500 data professionals from a wide range of job roles and from a variety of industries. And you can see one of the findings on the screen here. Software teams want to use production data. Obviously, this is no surprise. It's more predictable, reliable, but it's also not compliant, right? So given the need for production data, this next step may not come as a surprise, but the numbers are quite shocking. So 72% of people use a direct copy of production in their development, test, and QA environment. Interestingly, those who were restricted from using prod data were mainly due to the data sensitivity and regulatory requirements. But with increasing regulation, organizations are having to take more caution with how data is used and who has access to it. So now I'd like to run another poll to see how you guys go about masking your data for your development and testing purposes. Okay, so please go ahead and select the option that applies to you. Okay, a couple more seconds here. Okay, so it looks like it's 50-50 again. So 50% said they're using a copy of production, and the other 50% said they're using a modified copy of production, which is great. Now, I'm assuming that those of you who are using the modified copy, you have some process of cleaning up data or through scripts or tooling to master your data. And the other 50% who are just using a copy of production should really look at implementing processes where the sensitive data or any production specific things that are in that database are masked and modified before they're provisioned down to lower environments to help you become more compliant and meet the regulatory requirements. So when it comes to solutions for protecting sensitive data, one solution is to have a version of the production database with limited data sets of anonymous data, which is always used to develop and test against. This does, though, mean changes are tested against a database that is neither realistic nor of a size where the impact on performance can be assessed. Another solution is to take a copy of the production database and mask the data manually by replacing columns with similar but generic data. This copy can then be used in development and testing, but obviously it will age very quickly as ongoing changes are deployed to the production database. So this is where data masking measures like pseudonymization, encryption, anonymization, and aggregation should be adopted. With advanced data protection practices, you will know where your data is stored and its level of sensitivity, and can build an up-to-date data catalog as a central reference guide for IT teams, giving them the context to implement the right controls to protect sensitive data. It's always surprising to me. I come across a lot of teams where they don't even know where, what tables and columns even hold sensitive data. So the process of masking that data is actually quite time consuming for them, because they have to go back and take a look at their databases, identify where the sensitive data is, and then kind of look at how they can go about masking that data. So once you have that data catalog integrated into your day-to-day processes, you can then automate security controls, streamline workflows, and guide the handling of sensitive information. You can also use data masking techniques, again, such as pseudonymization, to bring production-like data into development and testing while ensuring sensitive data isn't exposed, minimizing your exposure to a data breach, and provision new environments at speed and support a DevOps way of working without really increasing the potential sources for a data breach. And finally, by doing this, you can help your teams meet compliance standards through automation and development and deployment practices that are reliable, repeatable, and traceable. And finally, deliver your software the same way each time and get the transparency you need to pass the data security audits. So in DORA's report, it states that 87% of respondents said they were subject to requirements related to regulatory compliance. However, the report also said InfoSec teams are often relatively poorly staffed when compared to their technical peers. For example, the survey cites a ratio of 1 InfoSec person per 10 infrastructure people and per 100 developers in large companies. So, however, it's reassuring that compliance was mentioned as a benefit at each of the 4 stages of database DevOps. While there have been a number of people who have said that speed of change associated with DevOps can be seen as a risk to data security, 63% of the people we asked in Redgate's recent database DevOps survey said a DevOps approach to the database, in fact, has a positive impact on compliance requirements. And this is likely because DevOps introduces managed processes that actually simplify compliance by enabling software to be delivered in a consistent, reliable, and repeatable way, and by providing an audit trail of changes that have been made. So hopefully so far we've proven how database DevOps techniques can help you deliver value to your business quicker, while also ensuring data stays protected and you're meeting compliance requirements. So let's quickly recap the 4 stages that we went over today. So we talked about how you can standardize team-based development by introducing coding best practices and version control for the databases. We then looked at introducing automated database builds and tests to make sure your databases are always in a stable state, and identify any potential issues as part of our development process instead of waiting till deployment time. And finally, by having a good source control strategy and automated builds and tests, you can then introduce automated deployments through a release management process to promote your changes to higher environments with just a click of a button and with the right review and approval gates in place. So for those of you who are already doing, following these practices for your application code, so you should be able to ideally integrate your databases into the same systems that are already being used. So for instance, source control, you should be able to use whatever source control system you already have in place in your organization for your databases. Same with your CI and CD process. I've worked with teams who are using, TFS or using Jenkins, GitLab, TeamCity, Octopus Deploy, you name it. So you should really be able to just use whatever you already have and just simply integrate the databases into those processes. And finally, monitoring performance and availability of the database servers to identify and fix issues as quickly as possible, and protect and preserve data by applying the right masking processes to your sensitive production data before making them available for development or testing purposes in lower environments. So to learn more about how Redgate can help in any of these 4 areas, you can actually visit the Solutions tab on Redgate's homepage, and there's a lot of information. A lot of the information that we talked about today is already there, but you can also learn about the tooling that we offer that can help you with this. All right, now it's time for questions. So let's go ahead and take a look at the some of the questions that have been posted here. So first question, and a really good one. So the question is, how do organizations normally go about implementing these processes? Do they do all of those in one go, or is it done in stages? So I guess the answer really depends on your organization specifically. Obviously, when you're looking at implementing DevOps, it's it always starts with people and processes, right? So always you have to look at your teams and team structure, skills, what roles are available, and so on. And once you've done that, then I would recommend basically going through the stages in the order that we covered today. So start by looking at standardizing your development practices, for example. So, start by getting, into the habit of source controlling your database changes. I've worked with a lot of teams where, some of the database professionals weren't even familiar with source control systems or how to work with the source control system. So those are some of the gaps that you might come across in your organization that you will need to address. But yeah, starting with source control is really what I would recommend, and following those best practices of development for your databases, where everyone's checking changes into source control. Only changes from source control are being deployed to higher environments. So no more cherry picking, no more, manually scripting out changes, sharing those with other people through email and ticketing system and things like that. So I would definitely recommend starting there, and then kind of move your way up by then running automated builds against those changes that your team puts into source control. Get some automated validation and testing in place so you can validate the changes that are being made. And once you've done that, then look at how you can then promote the changes up the chain to your higher environments through a proper release management process, where you can version your releases. You can easily see what was released to a given environment, what was included in the release, what update scripts or database scripts were executed, and so on. So I worked with organizations where they were ready to do this whole process end to end. So they implemented the process end to end, and they had a couple of months of ramp up period to make sure that those practices are being followed. I've also worked with a lot of organizations where they decided to take small steps, start with, again, the development practices and kind of go from there. So I guess on that note, on our website, we do have this DevOps maturity assessment that you can take. So it will ask you a few questions. So it's kind of a survey type. And based on your answers, then you can get a printable report at the end that will basically tell you, how you compare, to the industry or the market, and what next steps, are recommended for you to take to become more mature in your DevOps journey. All right, so let's see what the next question is here. So another question is, so this is all good information at the high level, but when are we going to learn about the core functionality of Redgate tools? So we do run some webinars on actually monthly basis that talk about the the technology that Redgate offers and how we can help. So we also have a recording of some of the past webinars on our website where you can go and watch. So we normally try to switch around, work with different build systems, different source control systems, and things like that. So I would highly recommend you taking a look at some of those recordings and also signing up for some of our upcoming webinars for extending DevOps practices to databases. Okay, and actually another question. So how do Redgate database tools compare to Datacool database tools? So first of all, Redgate's primary area of focus is a SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server. So we're really well known in the community, and SQL Server is really our primary focus. The other main difference is that we try to basically incorporate our tools into whatever existing process that your team has, right? So for example, if the team prefers to work in SSMS for making their changes as their IDE, they can do that. Or if they prefer Visual Studio, they can do that. So we don't really offer a new IDE and force people to go and work in those new environments to make their changes and manage their database changes. We try to integrate into whatever our customers already have and make that process, I guess, the transition as smooth and easy as possible. All right, and finally, one more question. So is Redgate SQL Toolbelt what we need to be able to implement these stages that we talked about? So Redgate SQL Toolbelt can help you with 3 of these stages. So it can help you standardize your development practices. It can help you introduce automated tests, automated builds, and automated releases. And it can also help you with the monitoring state of your environments. But in order to do the whole compliant DevOps, you will also need Redgate SQL Provision, which is the provisioning and the masking part that you can implement against your databases and be able to, quickly spin up databases for lower environments for testing and development purposes, and also ensure that the data is protected and masked. Okay, so another question that just came up. So does Redgate have a rule engine to ensure the same attribute standards are applied across all environments? So not specifically a rule engine, but we do have basically coding analysis rules that you can run either manually as a developer or as part of your build process to make sure that you're adhering to coding best practices and everything else before your changes are even applied to any of the higher environments. All right, so it looks like that's all the questions we had for today. Now, I'd like to go ahead and before we wrap up, just one final note here. So we have Redgate SQL in the City Summit coming up in October, and we're hosting it in 3 different cities, so New York, Chicago, and London. And these exclusive events are designed to help you deliver value quicker while keeping your data safe. So it will be really great to have you at one of these events as well. So in these events, you'll hear from industry experts as they discuss the challenges of DevOps adoption and share their experiences of how to successfully implement database DevOps across an IT team. And these sessions are for C-level execs, directors, managers, senior database professionals, architects, and engineers who work on the Microsoft Data Platform. So please do check out our website and remember to use the code webinar to claim your complimentary ticket to any of these 3 events. Once again, thank you all for joining us today and hope you have a good rest of today.